Magic Tea House, Book Number 50, A Merlin Mission. Hurry up, Houdini, by Mary Pope Osborne. Chapter 5, Together. Jack whirled around and started back up Surf Avenue. The sidewalk was so crowded he had to jump off the curb into the street and trot alongside the old-timey cars and the horses and buggies. When Jack reached the theater, people were still making their way inside. He squeezed through the crowd, trying not to push anyone too hard. Excuse me, he said. He tried to sneak his way past the ticket taker, but the man grabbed him. Ticket, sonny? I don't have a ticket, said Jack. I just needed to get backstage fast. Beat it, kid, said the ticket taker. Wait, said Jack. He pointed at the chalkboard announcing their act. I'm Jolly Jack, see? I don't see nothing jolly about you, said the ticket seller. Beat it now or I'll call the cops. Next! Jack backed away from the door. He pulled out his pocket watch. It was 10 minutes to 8, and he had to go on at 8:15. He paced up and down the sidewalk, desperately looking for another entrance. There must be a door somewhere that leads backstage, he thought. He peered down a long, narrow alley beside the theater. The alley was dark, except for the glow of light from high windows above a row of garbage cans. Jack hurried down the alley. A rat skittered out from behind a can. Jack kept going until he rounded the corner. He found the back entrance, but when he tried the handle, it was locked. He banged and banged on the door, but no one answered. The windows, Jack thought. He hurried back into the alley. To reach the tops of the windows, he had to step from a packing crate onto the top of a garbage can. Jack stood on his toes and looked through a lit window. He saw a hallway, but no one was there. He carefully stepped from one garbage can to another until he reached the next window. Jack looked through the glass into the Bambini's dressing room. He saw Annie dressed in an oversized tuxedo. She was staring at a piece of paper. Jack pounded on the window. Annie, Annie, he shouted, panting. When Annie saw him, her face lit up. Hi, she yelled. She put down the paper and jumped onto a chair. She lifted a latch and then pushed the window up. Thanks for coming back, she cried. I am so sorry, Jack. Don't worry about it, he said. Are you coming in? Asked Annie. Yeah, hold on. Jack jumped down and picked up the packing crate. He placed it on top of the garbage can. Then he carefully climbed onto the can and the crate. Clutching the windowsill, he hoisted himself through the window. Annie helped him step down onto a chair and then onto the floor. Jack reached into his bag and pulled out the small bottle. You'll need this before you go on stage, he said, out of breath. Mist gathered at first light on the first day of the new moon on the Isle of Avalon. Thanks, said Annie, taking the bottle. When I realized I didn't have it, I didn't know what to do. That's what I figured, said Jack. Annie grabbed the paper from the table. Look at this, she said, handing it to Jack. The Bambini brothers must have left it. Jack and Annie looked at the paper together. It looks like a list of chicks, said Jack. He read, Instant Wand, 3 bunnies, Miracle Doves, Cards from Thin Air, Chinese Rings. Yeah, I think I have all the props for them, said Annie. See, There are 2 wands, 3 rabbits, 2 doves, a pack of cards, and 3 big rings. Yeah, it's all here, said Jack. But what do I do with it? Said Annie. Maybe you'll find out when you use the magic mist, said Jack. Oh, yes, I bet I will, said Annie. Yeah, Jack said. Now I can't wait to find out what's going to happen, said Annie. Bet you'll have a good time, said Jack. What are you thinking? Asked Annie. Should I still perform all by myself? Or do you think maybe we should perform together? Jack stared at her a moment, then sighed. Together, he said softly. Yay, said Annie. We'll be a great team, I promise. She held up the bottle. Should we use this right now? Do you want to? Said Jack. Yeah, then we'll be able to figure everything out. But remember, the magic only works for 1 hour. He looked at his watch. It's 5 after 8. If we start the magic now, we'll be great stage magicians until 5 after 9. No problem, said Annie. We go on at 8:15 for 30 minutes. That means we'll leave the stage at 8:45. There was a knock on the door. Mr. Wilson poked his head inside, and the noise of the audience rushed into the room like a lion's roar. Jack heard stamping and whistling and shouting. You go on in 10 minutes, Mr. Wilson said. Thanks, said Annie. The door closed. Jack looked at Annie in a panic. Did you hear that crowd? He said. Don't think about it, said Annie. Quick, let's use the magic. She pulled the cork out of the bottle. Ready? Jack nodded. Annie held the bottle under her nose. We wish to be 2 great stage magicians, she said, and she took a deep breath. Ah! Then she handed the bottle to Jack. Jack closed his eyes and inhaled the mist. It smelled of dewy grass, sparkling lake water, and wild thyme. He stuck the cork back into the bottle and put the bottle into the pocket of his pants. Jack gave Annie a big grin. He felt like a new person. The crowd wasn't scary anymore. In fact, he could hardly wait to get on the stage and show them what he could do. Okay, Jack said, clapping his hands. I'd better put on my costume. He grabbed the extra tuxedo and slipped behind a dressing curtain. As he changed his clothes, Jack realized that everything was slightly too big. But it didn't bother him. Not at all. He rolled up his pants cuffs and the sleeves of his shirt and jacket, and then stepped out from behind the curtain. You look just like a real magician, said Annie. Of course, said Jack, looking in the mirror and straightening his bow tie. For that is exactly who I am, and so are you. He looked around the room. In the corner was a table on a pedestal. The top was covered with black velvet, trimmed with gold fringe. Now let us prepare for our show. First, we'll put the rabbits and doves in the hidden compartments of that table, he said. Yep, said Annie. No problem. Jack and Annie began preparing their props quietly and expertly, as if they'd done it 1,000 times before. Jack picked up the rabbit cage and set it on the table. He pressed a small trap door in the middle of the velvet-covered tabletop, and the door flapped down. Here you go, bunnies, said Jack. He lifted the 3 small rabbits out of their cage and placed them comfortably in one of the table's hidden compartments. See you soon. While Jack took care of the rabbits, Annie handled the birds. She opened a second small door on the tabletop and carefully placed the 2 white doves into another secret compartment. "They look happy in there," she said. Jack set the deck of cards in the center of the table. Annie hid the 2 wands inside the sleeves of her tuxedo jacket. Jack pulled his pocket watch from his pants. 8:15, he said. Annie smiled. "We have 50 minutes of magic left," she said. Jack slipped the watch into the pocket of his tuxedo jacket. Annie arranged the silver rings on top of the table. A knock came at the door, and Mr. Wilson looked into the room. "Ready, Jolly Jack, Amazing Annie?" the stage manager asked. This time, the roar of the crowd did not alarm Jack in the least. In fact, it thrilled him. "Yes, indeed, Mr. Wilson. Thank you," he said with a jolly laugh. "If you would be so kind, Mr. Wilson, please set our table center stage," said Annie. "Hank, Butch!" Mr. Wilson shouted. 2 stagehands immediately appeared. They picked up the table and carried it out of the dressing room. When the stage crew was gone, Jack and Annie pulled on their white gloves. "You sure you feel okay about doing this?" Annie asked. "Totally." Jack smiled at her. He tightened his gloves and wiggled his fingers. Then he put on his top hat. "Let's go, my dear," he said, leading the way out the door. "It's show time." Chapter 6. Jolly Jack and the Amazing Annie. As the orchestra played, Mr. Wilson guided Jack and Annie through the backstage area. "Watch out, kids," he said. "Like I said before, it's a tough crowd out there tonight." Jack smiled confidently. "No crowd is too tough for us," he thought. Hank and Butch set the table with Jack and Annie's prop center stage behind the closed curtain. The stage was lit with a soft, rosy light. "Places!" called Mr. Wilson. Jack and Annie nodded and calmly took their places in front of the table. They heard a long drum roll, then a cymbal crash. They heard Mr. Dewey speaking to the audience from in front of the curtain. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Great Houdini Show. I have a very special and wonderful surprise for you this evening. As you may know, the Bambini brothers were scheduled to be our opening act. But instead, it will be your great good fortune to welcome a truly remarkable pair of young illusionists. These master magicians have performed in theaters all around the world, and tonight they are here to perform for you. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Jolly Jack and the Amazing Annie." A trumpet blasted, the curtain rose, and the crowd clapped and whistled as Jack and Annie stepped into a yellow spotlight. Looking out at the audience, Jack chuckled like a seasoned performer. His heart pounded, but not with fear. It pounded with an excitement that made him want to do his best. "Good evening, friends," Jack shouted over the applause. "They call me Jolly Jack because nothing brings me greater joy than entertaining folks like you. And they call my sister Amazing Annie because..." Jack held his gloved hand out toward Annie. "I love to amaze you with my amazing ability to amaze you," Annie shouted. The cymbal crashed. The crowd laughed. "Do not let our youthful appearance fool you," Annie went on. "My brother and I have traveled the globe to discover mysteries both ancient and modern." Jack took off his top hat and turned it toward the crowd. "I direct your attention to my hat," he said. "As you can see, the inside is quite ordinary, But strange things happen with this hat, especially when I touch it with a wand given to us by an Arabian princess." Jack looked around. "Oh dear, I seem to have forgotten my wand." Annie stepped forward. She swept her right arm in front of her, and presto, a wand appeared in her hand. Jack knew that when she waved her arm, she had simply allowed one of the hidden wands to slip from her sleeve. The cymbals crashed. The crowd cheered. Annie grinned triumphantly, bowed. While Annie was distracting everyone, Jack casually put his hat upside down on the velvet tabletop, over one of the hidden trapdoors. As he set the hat down, he pressed on the trapdoor and it flapped open. "Thank you, amazing Annie," Jack called. Annie handed Jack the wand, and he stepped back and waved it around the brim of the top hat. The crowd grew quiet. In a deep, mysterious voice, Jack intoned, "Zoom Bali Windu Chi Gon Hey," which means, "Oh marvelous hat, what do you have for me today?" Jack tapped the hat, stepped back from the table, and turned to Annie. "My dear, may I ask you to check my hat, please?" he said. "I have a feeling it holds a surprise." There was a drum roll as Annie slowly reached into the hat. Jack knew she was pushing down on the top of the hat, which also had a secret flap. A small white rabbit suddenly leapt from the secret compartment through the hat and into Annie's arms. The orchestra played triumphant music and the audience cheered. 2 more rabbits jumped out. Each time Annie caught the rabbits and pretended to be surprised. The cymbals crashed. The audience laughed and clapped. Annie handed the rabbits to Hank and Butch, who carried them off stage. Then she took off her own hat. "Ladies and gentlemen," she shouted, "as you can see, my hat is as empty as my brother's was." She showed the inside of the hat to the audience. "But it also holds wonders." Annie set her hat on the table beside Jack's, carefully placing it on top of the second hidden door. "Oh, I'm going to need another wand," she said. This time, she swept her left arm in front of her, and presto, the second wand appeared in her hand. As the crowd applauded, Annie waved the wand over her hat. In a strange voice, she said, "Zoom Bali Hula Hula Hi Ho Hey," which means, "A wondrous hat, send new friends our way." Jack reached into the hat, pushed down on the secret flap, then gently lifted out a dove. As the crowd cheered and clapped, he reached in again and took out the second dove. Jack handed the birds to Annie. They perched on her fingers as she lifted her hands into the air. The birds flapped their wings, bowing to the audience. The cymbals crashed. The crowd cheered and clapped. While Annie distracted the crowd with the birds, Jack scooped the deck of cards off the table and stepped into the shadows. Behind his back, he divided the deck equally. Then he hid the 2 halves in the palms of his hands. Annie gave the doves to Hank and Butch. Then she turned back to the crowd. "I believe my brother has something to share with you now," Annie shouted. "Jolly Jack?" Jack took Annie's place in the spotlight. "Are there any card players in the house?" he called. Many in the audience raised their hands. Some laughed loudly and teased each other. "Well then, my friends," said Jack, "my strong advice to you tonight is never play cards with a magician." As he spoke, he secretly gripped the edge of the card stack in his right hand. Using his thumb, he expertly inched the top card up until it was just behind his fingers. All the while, Jack kept talking. But oddly, some folks are foolish enough to challenge me to a game. Therefore, I never travel anywhere without a deck, but I prefer my cards to remain invisible until I am ready to use them. Jack then raised his right hand and flipped out the card, pretending to pluck it out of the air. The audience gasped. Cymbals crashed. Of course, you can't play a card game with only one card, Jack said. He reached into the air with his left hand. Ah, good. Here is another, and another, and another. The drummer pounded his drums each time Jack appeared to snatch a card from the air. He produced card after card. What's this? Another, another. Finally, he said, My goodness, I seem to have gathered an entire deck. Who wants to play a game? The cymbals crashed. The crowd cheered and Jack bowed. Annie stepped into the spotlight, holding up 3 large rings. Once upon a time, in a palace in China, we learned the ancient art of magic rings, she said. Jack knew that one of the rings had a tiny opening in it. Annie hid the opening between her thumb and index finger so no one could see it. These are 3 solid rings, Annie told the crowd. There is no way on earth to link them together. She banged the rings against one another, making a show of trying to fit them together. Each time she failed. Jack stepped forward. But deep in the palace of the emperor, he said, a Chinese sage taught us a magical song. Jack waved his wand over the first ring and sang, Hong, 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 hong. Annie banged the rings together again. This time, she slipped the solid rings through the hidden opening in the other ring. Her hands moved so swiftly no one could see what she was doing. Once again, the magic song has worked, she shouted, holding up the 3 connected rings. Cymbals crashed. As the crowd applauded, Annie easily disconnected the rings. Then she tossed the 2 solid ones high into the air. When they came down, she caught them so they slipped perfectly through the tiny opening of the 3rd ring. Annie held up the connected rings, and the orchestra played triumphant music. As she bowed, the audience clapped and cheered wildly. As she bowed, the audience clapped and cheered wildly. Jack joined her in the spotlight. You have been most agreeable and welcoming tonight, he shouted. We will think of you fondly for years to come, but now we must leave you. During intermission, you can prepare your minds and nerves in anticipation of the most amazing escape artist of all time, the great Houdini. Trumpet sounded. Everyone cheered and stamped their feet. Jack and Annie each bowed with a flourish. They raised their top hats to the crowd. Then, laughing and waving, they ran off stage and the curtain came down.